Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. Our theme, from Sarajevo to Torres, Sarajevo to the MH17 Malaysian airliner, from Sarajevo to Donetsk, Lugansk, the parallels and the dangers, right? This is the method of historical analysis recommended by Confucius in the Analects, by Machiavelli, and by others. I hesitate to put Arnold Toynbee with these two great people that I've just cited, but he also recommended it, right? Have one eye on the past, maybe on classical civilization or some relevant past, and one eye on the present, and you can understand so much more. And it's not a matter of analogies. It's simply a matter of heurism, right? Things that get you to think and have better understanding. So, on the one hand, we're in the midst of this wholly artificial crisis around the Malaysian airliner, with lunatic attempts to exploit this, and in particular the attempt to transform the funeral of these poor victims of power politics and geopolitics, to try to transform them into the symbols of a new European war. That was especially strong on CNN this week, the funeral coverage by Wolf Blitzer, but in particular by the former CIA asset Anderson Cooper and the lunatic propagandist Richard Quest. Both of them got the Goebbels Prize, but the competition for the Goebbels Prize is extremely intense this week, this month, as is indeed the competition for the Ribbentrop Prize. Although Kerry seems to be in the lead, Fabius is trying to overtake him, and we have other contenders as well. There is therefore an attempt to turn this event into the signal, not just for a new Cold War, but for a confrontation. And we have to remember the general thought mechanism of the average person is, oh, those neocons, or whatever they are, those Samantha Power humanitarian bombers, they may be crazy, but certainly they can't want nuclear war. You have to remember that for those people, there is always this mechanism, which is that if you go to a confrontation and you go to the brink, as John Foster Dulles always put it, or Nixon, right? If you show that you're crazy enough, then the other side will back down. That's always built into their calculation, that the relatively more rational, less hysterical leadership of somebody like Putin is likely to back down. This is a calculation of supreme folly, incalculable folly. And that is where we now find ourselves. And, of course, all of this occurring at the 100th anniversary now of the outbreak of World War I. We're recording on the afternoon of July 25th, 2014, and we're headed now towards the first declaration of war, which occurred on the 28th of July. This was Count Berchtold and Konrad von Hötzendorf, the Austrian military leader, declaring war on Serbia. This is what started the entire thing, the first declaration of war, although at just about the same time, Sir Winston Churchill had decided to send the British fleet through the English Channel. On the afternoon of July 28th, 1914, Winston Churchill ordered the fleet to proceed during the night at high speed with no lights from Portsmouth, where they'd been having the review, the Naval Review, Fleet Week, whatever you want to call it, through the Straits of Dover to the wartime base at Scapa Flow, north of Scotland. And on July 29th, the official warning telegram was sent out from the Admiralty. So therefore, we had Serbia mobilizing on July 25th, today, 100 years ago, and then Great Britain mobilizing the fleet on the 28th, followed then by Russia, Austria, France, and Germany all mobilizing. And this question of mobilization, of course, mobilization in those days was war. That was the only way to understand it, especially if it was the Russian mobilization upon which everything else depended. Mobilization was a war. No way around it. So we're going through these anniversaries right now. We'll get back to this in a minute. But let's look at the situation in the world, right? First of all, we've got the Gaza atrocities by the Israelis have correctly excited the animosity of the universe, and it started with the 4 Palestinian kids getting rocketed on a beach as they were playing and others injured, and now overnight we've had 20 people, many children, killed in a United Nations school in Gaza. And this morning, the word in the Washington Post, I won't go through any quotations from this, but we have Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to Washington, who's been working as a spokes for these atrocities. He says the world has to stand aside while the Israelis crush Hamas. Well, unfortunately, this is faulty political thinking. It's a crime, to be sure, but it's also worse than a crime. It's a mistake. In other words, there is no military way to crush Hamas, and I think this is in bad faith. Hamas was widely reported to be in a crisis of legitimacy some months ago, and the net effect of this current round of atrocities by the Israelis is to shore up Hamas. And naturally, I'm a big critic of Hamas because they were backing Morsi in Egypt. There is good reason to believe that Hamas was at least complicit in sending terrorists into the northern Sinai. So they're not just attacking the Israelis; they attack the Egyptians. And Haniyeh, after having gone to Iran to see Ahmadinejad in the early part of 2012, he then turned around and began attacking Assad of Syria. So Haniyeh is a very fishy character. But we've got to set aside the problems of Hamas, right? We know that this organization was in effect created by Ariel Sharon. It was designed to be a counterweight to split the Palestinians against the PLO. But now we've got to think about all these people, right? So it's about 800 Palestinian dead, and this is now it's going at about 20-1 from the casualties on the Israeli side, approximately 40, and on the Palestinian side, about 800. So 20-1. Still not good for the Israelis, right? In the long run, that's more damaging to them demographically than it is to the Palestinians. But what horrible calculations are these? I would say, obviously, Netanyahu is a madman. Netanyahu cannot be tolerated by the world. We should also remember that the degradation of Israeli politics is to a large degree Netanyahu's handiwork as finance minister, imposing effect shock therapy on a rather, what can we say, well-organized Israeli economy decades ago. We now have this situation where the youth generation of Israel feel they have nowhere to go. We've had those huge demonstrations, no future. So with no future, this kind of demagogy can get going. It is also, as I'll just say in a minute, time to impose a solution. A solution must be imposed on these parties. And we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. When it comes to the question of a solution, if it turns out now, as it seems, that the two-state solution cannot be negotiated by the principals themselves, it would be the task of the international community, in a real sense, to to impose such a solution, and it would go something like this. It's more or less the Geneva Accord of Yossi Beilin and Yasser Abed Rabo from November 2003, which remains the landmark. It's two states, equally sovereign. It means the 1967 borders with agreed on changes. It means that all Israeli settlements must go unless they are agreed to in one of these exchanges, and that the right of return will have to be relativized into indemnities. In other words, people have a right to return in theory, but in practice, the way that's going to be expressed is through indemnities, through large cash payments to them, permitting them to set up a new life where they want. Same thing goes for the Israeli settlers. Those people, many of them poor and desperate, will have to be indemnified. And with that, you'd also have to have then security guarantees for both sides. You'd probably have to have a peacekeeping force strung out along the various borders. And the most important element is the economic reconstruction and development plan, which would have to be also Middle East regional, couldn't just be Israeli because of the nature of it, couldn't be just Israel and Palestine. It would have to be a more general plan, and including all of the war-destroyed areas, be it now Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, the Sinai, you go down the list, all the way down to Somalia. In other words, an entire Middle East economic reconstruction program. And if we had a rational approach to world affairs, this could then be imposed. As it is, it's not clear where we're going. What we do find is that the closing of the airport indicates a serious weakness for the Israelis, and it's actually amazing that these airlines did not draw these conclusions at an earlier point. Iron Dome, okay, up to a certain point, but if you had somebody like Hamas being joined by Hezbollah, this is an unlikely combination, but just from the technical point of view, if you had these rockets coming in from two directions, or suppose you had them coming in from some part of Syria, right? Suppose there was some group there that decided that they wanted to start sending these rockets in, then that Iron Dome might not look so effective. And one of the scenarios, of course, if the U.S. were ever to attack Iran, one of the obvious things would be to simply keep Israel under continuous rocket fire, obviously now focusing on these airports, and do tremendous damage, right? That's the one of the reasons you don't want to have a general war in the Middle East. So obviously it's time to have the ceasefire. But the one thing that world public opinion has understood here in this current crisis is that not only is there an occupation, in effect, there's certainly an occupation of the West Bank, it's very oppressive, but then there's also a blockade. In other words, you take this entire Gaza area, make all those people into de facto prisoners, you've got a blockade. And I think world public opinion has understood it for the first time, perhaps, that there is a blockade and that also has to end. But if you want to get out of that, you've got, not only do you have to convince the Israeli side, you got to convince Egypt. And that's where Haniyeh is an impossible candidate for doing anything, right? The word was that if you had an election, Hamas would be out on their ear. But that's not the case anymore. Now you've got another 2 or 3 years for Hamas. So this is a terrible situation, and unless and until we get cooperation of the great powers, notably the United States and Russia would be the ones that would have to do this principally, then this simply goes on and on. So there we go. And the word to all concerned is, if you don't want peace, if you don't want war, negotiate peace and pay the price for peace in terms of concessions. One thing that could push this along, if American public opinion is increasingly horrified by the Israeli atrocities, perhaps now it's time to cut the $3 to $4 billion per year subsidy which the United States pays for this, this would then force Israel to act more as a normal country. That is to say, not having this huge subsidy, they would then have to find concessions and other means to get along, to somehow reach a modus vivendi with their various neighbors. So this is obviously a big element in the world crisis, right? Along with ISIS and everything going on in Syria and elsewhere, and of course Ukraine. Now let's focus on Ukraine. We're 8 days since the downing of this Malaysian Airlines plane. The hypotheses are many. I'm not going to try to do a detailed technical analysis, because what I'm more concerned with is the political consequence. In other words, what should be done? What's the answer? Not information, but policies are the key thing. Well, what was this? Was this a surface-to-air missile battery of the BUK type, the BUK, or some other kind, right? A SAM-11 or whatever it is, from the Ukrainian army, right? You got to remember, all of these systems, especially the older ones, are held in common by the Russian forces, the Ukrainian forces, and indeed others in the area, notably Georgia, right? They have similar kinds of weapons. So it could very easily be a BUK of the Ukraine military itself. It could also be the aviation answer, right? It could be that Ukraine fighters were around, 2, 1, different reports, and therefore that would have to be explored, right? One thing I can say is that taking the black box to London obviously guarantees us that there will be no reliable or impartial reading of this, because of Perfide Albion and their sad history. The one thing I guess we do know, and this is at least the view of the U.S. intelligence community, let's see if we can find this, that the U.S. intelligence community, and this is an Associated Press dispatch of July 22nd, no evidence of direct Russian link to plane. Senior U.S. intelligence officials say they have no evidence of direct Russian government involvement in the shooting down of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. That was as of Tuesday. It remains the same. All the stuff from Kerry and others is baloney. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. And this is once again the 25th of July, the day that Serbia, first country to mobilize. They actually gave the order to mobilize at the same moment that they sent their answer to the Austro-Hungarian ultimatum of 2 days earlier. This all happened within the same period of a couple of hours. Anyway, the Tuesday press conference was off the record. Senior U.S. intelligence officials. Who could that be? Could that be Brennan? We don't know. The officials briefed reporters Tuesday under ground rules that their names not be used in discussing intelligence related to last week's air disaster. They don't know if Russians were present. They wouldn't say that the crew was trained in Russia. There are some other quotes from this saying, we don't have a name, we don't have a rank, we don't have a serial number, we don't have a nationality. They know, in effect, nothing. So all of that garbage from Kerry about proof, hard evidence, there is none. So that also indicates what we've been told, right, that there was a faction of the CIA that was not interested in this confrontation and that was advancing other theories. If you look at my Twitter feed from a week ago or more, you'll see, or from a week ago, you'll see that indeed there was a CIA opposition group that was somehow being heard, at least indirectly, through the press. All right, so that's going on. Now, the interesting thing, how was this done? You'll remember 9/11 synthetic terror made in USA, right? The stress on drills, exercises as the means to mobilize government resources for something that can only be done using government resources. And that's done by taking a drill that is already in existence and it's probably legal and sanctioned and whatever else, but then turns out to be redirected, right? It gets, in effect, changed, right? It goes live. It becomes the ultimate in verisimilitude and realism, that is to say, the real thing. So, lo and behold, here now we have NATO's exercise Breeze. Now, normally this is Sea Breeze, and we've had this in previous years, and you may remember some years back, during the height of the Iraq War, as I recall it, there were a couple of NATO warships that were supposed to dock in Odessa, as I recall, or some other Ukrainian Black Sea port, and there was a large public demonstration to get those NATO warships out of there. And we reported it on this broadcast. And that was Sea Breeze 2007 or 2008 or whatever it was. This time, it's down to Breeze 2014. So what is this? It is a naval exercise in the Black Sea. The largest or most significant warship we know of is an Aegis cruiser. The U.S. Aegis cruisers, these are the ones with those phased array radars, right? That's the big feature of the ship that you see, the phased array radar built into the superstructure. And in this case, it's the USS Vela Gulf. So the Vela Gulf was in the Black Sea during this time. Now, there's an attempt to argue that the Vela Gulf had departed through the straits. It had gone through the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, according to some reports. This seems to be a cover-up. The U.S. method is this. According to the Treaty of Montreux, which governs this very, very sensitive, one of the most sensitive points on the world in the world, maritime situation, the Straits, Turkey. If you're a country that does not have a coast on the Black Sea, if you're a non-littoral nation, your ships are supposed to stay there. Warships are supposed to stay 21 days at most. Now, the U.S. gets around this by manufacturing mechanical difficulties. They say, oh, our engine broke down, we got to stay another week, or our engine broke down, we've got to dock here in Romania and get some repairs. You get the idea. So that seems to be one of the ways that they kept the Vela Gulf there. And you'll remember the Truxton and some other of these ships. There were also forces from Bulgaria, Turkey, United Kingdom, Greece, Spain, Italy, France, United States, others. And this features AWACS, right? Electronic surveillance planes of various sizes, but including AWACS. And those would have been observing everything going on in this area of Torres, right? Torres, of course, Maurice Torres, the head of the French Communist Party, died 50 years ago. I think this month. Ironic that this would happen there, but then he got a city named after him in the then Soviet Union, and that name has stuck. So that's Torres. That's the largest town of any size near the crash site. So, Breeze 2014, and we need answers, of course. We want to know to what degree Breeze 2014 followed this. We want to subpoena the tapes. We want to see the electronic surveillance carried out by the Aegis cruiser Vela Gulf, who can easily see all this stuff, and the AWACS planes and other smaller electronic surveillance aircraft that were flying all over the place precisely during this time. There's another interesting issue that we remember last week we talked about Carlos, the Spanish air traffic controller, and his story is still being verified, but the one thing that seems to be the case is the air traffic controller tapes from the Kiev airport are missing. So this would have been one of the main sources for enlightenment about what happened to this aircraft, and they're gone. Reminds me of certain things that happened around 9/11, right? The methodology remains the same. So again, you want to learn the methodology. 9/11 Synthetic Terror, Made in USA, the 5th edition, where we're up to 45, 46 drills, exercises used to carry out that one. Now, Air Algeria. I think this is also quite interesting, tragic, but interesting. So in northern Mali, now, as soon as you get into this area, you got to think Libya, right? This vast desert, this ocean of sand is now the playground for these terrorist groups. And where would they get such weaponry? Why, obviously, from the arsenals of the late Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, the Libyan government, which these imperialist meddlers and butchers were so eager to overthrow. Bernard-Henri Lévy, we're hearing from Bernard-Henri Lévy. He's back, saying that what NATO, what Europe is doing is a monstrosity. Of course, they've got to attack Putin. Putin's crime, Europe's cowardice, says Bernard-Henri Lévy, 22nd of July, 2014. How can this person show his face? He's the one who convinced Sarkozy to begin the bombing of Libya back in March of 2011 with this Benghazi story. So now, the contents of all of those Gaddafi arsenals, now generalized all over Nigeria, Boko Haram, they have them all over, Central African Republic, you name it, it's all over the place. So therefore, I would say the most likely hypothesis is that those surface-to-air missiles taken from Gaddafi's arsenal was let loose on this Air Algerie. The French government is saying that this was because of the weather. This is ridiculous. How many times have we been in aircraft where the pilot says, oh, by the way, folks, we have some big thunderstorms ahead of us. They go way, way up. We can't go over them. We're going to go around them, and they fly around them, and that's that. So this French explanation makes no sense. Fabius and company are probably ashamed of themselves, if they have any shame, for destroying Libya and making all this possible. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington. Now, the one other thing that would have to be said about Ukraine, there is a political faction which has shown itself to be bloodthirsty in the extreme, absolutely ruthless, and somewhat centralized, with significant stocks of relatively modern military equipment. If we go back to the beginning of May, I believe, we will find the massacre at one of the government buildings in Odessa, where anti-fascist elements were trapped in this building, and a fire was set, but the building was big and old and stone, and the fire was not what killed these people. It was rather death squads that went through the building. These were pro-Kiev, pro-fascist death squads who then killed large numbers of people, 50, 60, 100, we don't know, naturally, in the complete indifference and cold disregard of the controlled prostitutes here of the West. But the guy behind that is Kolomoisky. He is, among other things, the local boss of Dnepropetrovsk, I believe. He is a fantastically rich oligarch, and this Kolomoisky, with his hands dripping with blood from the Odessa massacre, has assembled something called the Dnieper Battalion. The Dnieper Battalion of Kolomoisky. And these characters apparently do have these surface-to-air missiles. Maybe Buk, maybe Sam-11. These may be the same. They may be different. They may be a mixture. Whatever it is, Kolomoisky looks like a good suspect for this stuff. Now, of course, when we look at all this stuff, we got to think back to Sarajevo, right? 28th of June, 1914, the thing that blew the lid off the world. Although not immediately, only after a month. And you'll also remember, as I tried to stress, it's not Sarajevo per se that gets you to World War I. It's the investigation and the Austrian ultimatum concerning the form that investigation will take. So we have to think about the obvious parallels, and I've tried to cite some of the material about this, and I now have gotten my hands on one of these pieces. You'll remember Charles Henry Norman of the British Independent Labour Party wrote about his experiences on the 28th of June, 1914 in downtown London, when various bigwigs came to him and said, have you got any news from Sarajevo? Answer, what's Sarajevo? And then the guy goes off raving, I hope they didn't screw it up. I hope they didn't blow it. And then later a well-connected lady says, what they're saying at the newspapers is that this is the signal for the big European war, which a lot of people didn't think, right? The Austro-Hungarian royal house, just to speak for them, said, why should this have any political consequences, right? We have anarchists killing people all the time. Of course, it was more complicated than that, but you get the idea, right? To know right away that that's the signal for the big European war indicates a degree of insider knowledge. That was not at all obvious in retrospect. So this interesting essay by Charles Henry Norman called Grand Orient. This is in German only so far. We hope to do something about this, but Grand Orient, Incidents on Sunday, the 28th of June, 1914, in London by C.H. Norman. And this is published in an interesting publication. This is called Berliner Monatshefte für internationale Aufklärung. And that's Berlin monthly issues, right? Monthly notebooks, monthly volumes for international enlightenment. And this is essentially a publication set up by the German government to try to refute the war guilt clause of the Versailles Treaty. So in here we have this entire story, right, that this was awaited. Now, in other sources that I've found now, we also find that there was, in the Austrian press in Vienna, during the war, now this may, you could say this is war propaganda, I don't know, but it's interesting that the Vienna Neue Presse, the Neue Presse of Vienna, talks about the Russian ambassador in Belgrade, right, in Serbia, and he says that in St. Petersburg, the Russians were waiting for the news of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand several days before it happened. So this is from the Vienna Neue Freie Presse, New Free Press, 4th of August, 1916. So not only in London were they waiting, but apparently also in St. Petersburg and Paris. I don't know, but it may well be. So you get the idea, right? These were not sociological phenomena. They were coordinated. So this is now the situation. When we talk about Kolomoisky, just to get back to him for a second, Kolomoisky comes on the scene, Ukrainian scene nationally, as an ally of Yulia Tymoshenko, the kleptocratic gas princess that we've talked about, right? NATO asset. It's also interesting that Kolomoisky seems to be the contact man for Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden, of course, the son, one of the sons of Joe Biden, our vice president, and that Kolomoisky also has the contacts, or has contacts, to Saakashvili, the tin pot fascist of Georgia. So Kolomoisky, this is now an interesting sociological study. I urge sociologists to get to work for a change. And in this case, Kolomoisky as a warlord, right? This is now a warlord of the 21st century with this, large dimension of international connections and God knows what. The other thing you should know about what's going on in Ukraine, on the one hand, the Yatsenyuk government has fallen, at least in theory, because Yatsenyuk will stay on as a caretaker. He's not going to quit. He's going to go on until parliamentary elections, which I believe are supposed to be held in October. Now, this has to do with various kinds of money, and what Yatsenyuk seems to want is he wants to privatize the gas pipeline network, and we know that one of the IMF conditions, maybe not stated, but maybe secret, right, maybe under the table, is that the IMF wants the Ukrainian gas pipeline system given to Chevron for nothing, right, simply granted to them for $1 or whatever it is. That seems to have been one of the issues. The other thing that the wonderful Ukrainian Rada is doing is to expel the Communist Party. Now, this means a party which has, I believe, about 8 or 10% of the votes is going to be thrown out if they get their way. You'll remember that Turchinov had been talking about this before in one of his outbursts, but now it looks like it's going to go through. When was the last time that a Communist Party was thrown out of a European Parliament and its parliamentary representation gotten rid of? Of course, you can go back to Germany in the 1950s when the KPD was banned, but they didn't really have anybody in Parliament. How about the first months, February, March 1933, Hitler, of course, expelled the KPD, communists, from the Reichstag, and they were, the second largest faction, the third largest faction. They had lots and lots of parliamentary representation. And you remember that happened before the enabling law was voted on that allowed Hitler to consolidate his dictatorship. So that's the wonderful democratic paradise of Yatsenyuk in Kiev. And we wonder how Nuland feels about this, that her protege has been bounced out. Maybe, of course, he's only, this is simply a pro forma resignation that he'll stay in power. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, our edition of the 25th of July. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, you remember last week we wanted to bring on Reverend Edward Pinkney of Benton Harbor, Michigan, and that didn't work out. But today it looks like we're in luck, and we have the Reverend with us who's going to give us an update on this struggle situation in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and in Detroit and other parts of Michigan. Maybe a few words about the water situation, which has become so dramatic. But welcome, Reverend.
Hey, thank you so much, Webster, for having me. I do want to apologize. Last week we was at the protest, and I had my cell phone ready because it was one of the biggest protests that we have had in such a long time. There was 2,000 nurses there. And the newspaper said altogether, they said it was less than 1,000, and yet we know that we had probably close to 10,000 people.
And that was in Detroit.
Yeah, it was in Detroit. It was over that water. It was, we chanted, no water, no peace, and we had this big truck with a big loudspeaker on there, and everybody was behind this truck. So what they did, they took the truck. And what we did, we took the streets completely. They had tried to rope us off, keep us from moving, but we took the street and we was in total control. See, this is what I'm telling people. It's when the people are in support of something, you are in control. There's nothing they could do to stop us from taking control of the city and the streets. For 3 hours, we had everything. They wanted us to go to a certain route. We changed the route on them, and there was nothing they could do. And that water situation in Detroit is out of hand.
Reverend, can you explain this issue for us? So those of us who are not in Detroit, maybe this is not so obvious. Just give us an overview of this water issue and how that works.
Well, here it is. Kevin Orr, the emergency manager, went out and hired a firm to start cutting off people's water. Let's say if you owed $30 or you didn't pay for 1 month, they send these guys out to cut your water off. Once they cut the water off, your house is considered condemned. Also, if you have children in the house, DHS is called in to take your children from you. So it started here in the city of Benton Harbor. This is where, see, everything that happens here eventually get to Detroit. They did the same identical thing here in the city of Benton Harbor. But one of the things that they're doing now that we did, we wouldn't let them come out and cut off the water. When they cut it off, we cut it back on. And that's the method that we get. So eventually, now they don't do it. But this is what I was up there when I spoke up in Detroit. I told them that you have to fight back and show them that you're serious about what you're doing. You have to make sure. Some of us may have to go to jail. But the point is, we'll make a statement if we do. So that's what it was all about. And I tell you, it was such a tremendous. I'm still talking about that protest because so many people came from all over the country to be there. If you don't stand up for water, I don't think there's nothing in this world you're going to stand up for.
So let me get it straight now. Your method is when they come around with this wrench and they get this, most houses have some kind of a fixture in front or in back, and they get their big monkey wrench and they turn this thing around and the water's cut off. Your method is your people come around with a monkey wrench and just turn it back the other way and
cut
the
it
water
back
flows.
On. And look, and here's the good part about that. It takes them almost a month to realize that your water is back on. That's what I was telling people in Detroit. The same formula that we use, you should be using. But a lot of people, they feel, well, you're going to go to jail, you do something like that. Well, put us in jail. If you put me in jail for a cause, I'm not mad. I'm willing to go to jail for the people, just to make sure that, we win this battle. And we can win this battle, Webster. It's such a beautiful situation. Matter of fact, we chased them out of it. They don't even talk about the water no more here in Benton Harbor. But now they've given up.
They've given up on the water.
Yeah.
Great.
So
now, let me
how it goes.
I see things where people are saying that this is now a public health emergency and this has got to stop. How about the area of, legal action or humanitarian appeals, anything to be gotten there?
Yeah, well, the United Nations supposed to have stepped in and talked about that. Matter of fact, they had some guys from the United Nations in the protest with us. And but I think the way we got to fight this, this is my thought. If they cut your water off, cut it back on. That means that's double work for them. And they don't, and I'm talking about cutting off from 500 to 1,000 people water a day. They got a whole unit out there. But what they did, here's a move that they made too that's important. They went out and laid in front of the trucks to keep them from coming out for 4 hours. And anytime you do a move like that, eventually you get noticed and they can stop this.
Okay.
Wow, it's something, Webster. It's something. Also, my trial has been set off to October 27th of this year. Once again,
now you're accused of petitioning to recall this Whirlpool mayor of Benton Harbor.
That's correct. It was a petition to recall the mayor here, and they sent the SWAT team out. To arrest me, and I was over at the courthouse on Monday teasing them, telling them that they didn't have enough. They should have next time you send the army, don't send a few cops out here for me. And so they didn't like that because you're not supposed to say stuff like that. And also the appeal court is hearing the case. They asked for the documents to see what we're talking about. So at least we know now that the appeal court is going to hear the case, which is really a good thing for us, I think. And it doesn't say that they're going to side with us, but it does say that they are going to review it. Because usually the appeal court don't review things like this.
I got it. All right, Reverend, that's wonderful. More power to you. Now, why don't you use a little time now and tell people how they can get in touch with you and help for all these legal fees and get in touch with this struggle to keep the water flowing.
Amen, because I tell you, this is how we're going to do it. You can reach me at 269-925-0001. That's 925-0001, or you can go to my website, which is bhbanco.org, and donate. Or you can send me a check in the mail. Just put Banco, B-A-N-C-O, 1940 Union Avenue, Benton Harbor, Michigan, 49022. That's Banco, 1940 Union Avenue, Benton Harbor, Michigan, 49022. And we do need funds. If we're going to continue to fight, we have to have resources. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to build up enough resources so we can go chest to chest with this prosecutor and their gang, because they want to put me in jail. That's all they care about.
Now, let me ask you, what does it look like now in the next couple of weeks, and what's going to happen with this guy, Kevin Orr? Is he in there for life, or does he have a term, or what's with him?
Well, with Kevin Orr, now remember now, he's Snyder's college buddy. So he's going to be there as long as he wants. But here's something that happened I didn't mention about the pension. They went out and got these people that's still working to vote on the pension, the cut in the pension, and they voted, 70% of them agreed for the cut in the pension. But the ones who's receiving their pensions right now, they voted no. So you got about 28% of the people are receiving pensions voted no, and the ones who not receiving pensions voted yes. And that's what messed them up. You know, they want you to give back 5% of your pension right now. So that's why we have to fight. All right,
Reverend, you got to keep in touch. We'll try to get you next week if we can.
All right, I'll be around next week. I promise you I'll be home.
We'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So that is the invincible Reverend Pinckney, and it's BH, so Benton Harbor, in effect, BHBANCO.org to keep up to date with what he's doing and to help him, which I hope people will do. But now we're going to the center of the election year action, and this is Nebraska, and of course our favorite candidate, the Tax Wall Street Party candidate for United States Senate from Nebraska, Dan Burdorf, who is in the final phase of getting the signatures necessary to give the citizens a choice between the two Wall Street parties, where there's not a dime's worth of difference. So let's listen now to Dan Burdorf. Are you there, Dan?
Webster, hi, this is Dan. I'm just rushing back to my car to get a little quieter space. We're petitioning right now in Grand Island, Nebraska, Grand Island DMV, and we're off to go to a church event here in Grand Island to get some more signatures. So if you'll excuse me for 1 second, I just want to get to where it's quiet here. There's a little bit too much traffic here.
Of course, take your time.
Yeah, okay.
Take your time.
Thanks. There's no time, Webster, actually. There's not a lot of time. But we are petitioning to get on the ballot at the Buffalo County Fair in Kearney. And like I said, in Grand Island here at the DMV. And we've been hitting it as hard as we can. And we are finished petitioning in District 1 and 2. So you are correct. We are very close. And you should be able to see photos of our booth posted on Facebook and Twitter by today. That's at Dan for Nebraska. Also, I think that should be up at danfornebraska.com. But we're at Facebook, Dan for Nebraska, /Dan for Nebraska, and at Dan for Nebraska on Twitter. And if you are able to, speaking to your listeners, Webster, if I may, for a moment, if you are able to come to Lincoln, Nebraska, or Nebraska in general to petition, please consider extending your stay and coming earlier and staying longer. Numbers and petitioners and numbers of days, that's all crucial for us to have a chance. And I want to say special thanks to Thomas Mars and Joe Johnson and Danny Sullivan and the people in Kearney and Grand Island for helping us this week. And we have some other people coming out today even. We should have Daniela Walls on the way and Paul Kramer's coming out. So, the booth, if you look at that picture, at Denver, Nebraska, at the different websites and social media, we are flying the KIA flag at our booth in Kearney, and we are sticking to our commitment that we made with our veteran friends, the veterans group, and we are committed to protecting our veterans that served us, because the love of our country that the veterans showed with their service is mirrored by our love for them and our wish to serve them. So we're going to keep that up. I know you like to hear a weather report, Webster, and we are getting into the triple digits now this week. The mild weather is gone, and our friend Thomas Mars, he suffered from some mild heat exhaustion this week, but after some rest and some water and a strawberry ice slushy, he was back on his feet petitioning. So we're actually going door to door canvassing in Grand Island when we need to in the neighborhoods to reach our goals. And the people are very supportive of our door-to-door efforts, and we are getting a high percentage of the people we contact. So it's all been very good. I wanted to ask you a question. If you've heard about the 300 GOP that revolted against Brownback in Kansas. This is a report I heard recently.
Tell us.
It's happening, or it's happened in Kansas now. It includes governors and other party leaders. There has been a GOP revolt in Kansas, and it's a revolt against the extreme neocons. So why this is interesting to me, and why I wondered if you had heard about it, is because we share a wide border with Kansas, and Stas is a spiritual brother to Brownback, and this is going to generate a lot of cross-border interest. And we have a lot of people on the border of Kansas. That's all going to be District 3, which is where we're campaigning. So I wondered if you heard about that, or are you following?
What I can tell you is that Kansas, of course, is one of the main headquarters of Koch Industries,
yep.
right? Koch, or Koch, as they want to be called, but I'm afraid in English it's Koch. The Koch brothers and their Koch Industries, that is to some degree centered in Kansas, and there was an attempt over many years to make Kansas into a kind of a demonstration model of the hell on earth that we would have if the Koch brothers were running everything. So I'm guessing that there may be some people saying that's too much.
Enough is enough. Yeah, it sounds like enough is enough for Kansas. I hope so. But I also want to ask you for your kind attention, Webster, and your listeners, to a letter I posted on my website. It's called A Letter from a Third-Party Spoiler. It's on danfornebraska.com and on my social media. And in it, I mentioned that Nebraskans are very familiar with William Jennings Bryan and the People's Party populists of the 1890s. And they know the importance of new parties and how important that has been to sustaining American democracy. And I also ask, where is our generation's Transcontinental Railroad, and where is our generation's Homestead Act, and where is our generation's moonshot? And when was the last time we cured a disease in America? And our program that we're running on is going to be able to answer those questions. I believe that the Catholic Hospital has turned her bill over to a collection agency. She reported that Blue Cross Blue Shield has refused to pay the Catholic Hospital because they charged a little bit too high prices for Blue Cross Blue Shield. So hopefully her family can help her. But this is shameful in America. This is just intolerable. And we hear these stories every day. That people need help, and I think our program gives that help to them. If we can get it working and we get it some people that can push this program, we have a chance to save this country. And I also want to tell you about a person who I met in Grand Island, whose husband came to the U.S. illegally, and he tried for 15 years to get his legal status. He married and had 2 young daughters. And on Christmas Day 4 years ago, he was arrested and sent back to Mexico. 6 days later, his pardon for driving without a license was delivered to his wife from the president, but he was already on a flight to Mexico by the time she reported it to the authorities. So now she's raising her 2 daughters by herself. And ironically, years earlier, before she married, her $17 an hour job was moved to Mexico. And her company told her, the way her company wanted to take care of her, they told her that she could keep her job if she relocated to Mexico with her job. And of course she declined because she doesn't have anybody there. She has her whole family's in Grand Island, Nebraska. So now she works 2 jobs. And she raised
Stay with us, Dan. just wrap up in the top of the next segment. Dan Burdorf, United States Senate, Nebraska. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. And we got a few more minutes with Dan Burdorf running for United States Senate in Nebraska, gathering signatures in Grand Island at the Motor Vehicle Bureau and also at the Buffalo County Fair out there in Nebraska. The website, danfornebraska.com, and also on Facebook and Twitter, Dan for Nebraska. So you were saying,
well,
Dan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Webster. I really appreciate it. Go ahead.
Well, we just went through some of the people that you've been meeting, right? It's obviously the panorama of American people suffering from economic privation in a brutal depression.
It's the same in North Omaha, Webster. We were just there last week, and the people have the same stories, living in cars. Webster, I'm just the rent of the litter, okay? In Nebraska, I'm the rent of the litter. I'm just a fellow with these ideas, and I'm trying to push them as best I can. I'm trying to get on the ballot. I've been invited to the big debate at the State Fair in Grand Island next month on the 25th. So we have a chance. We have a chance to get these ideas out. When people hear this, they take to it. Webster, it's a great program I'm running on. And like I said, I'm the run of the litter. I'm the little guy. I have little resources. I'm doing my best. But when I hear these stories, it makes me want to stay in and fight. Webster, these people, they need help. And Nebraska is not unique to that. Everywhere across the country, people are struggling. People are living in cars. We just met a guy last night at the Kearney Fair in Hall County. The guy was trying to help a fellow worker that he works with, a fellow who has some mental problems. He's had the same minimum wage job for 14 years, no raise. He's a mentally handicapped person doing his best. He lives in his car. He works full-time, lives in his car. He has no benefits in his job. His coworkers take up collections to buy him glasses when he needs them, when he breaks them or loses them. They take him in from time to time. He gets passed around by his coworkers. The people's heart is so good, Webster, and the system is so horrible. It's in shambles. It's the more I hear, the more I want to help these people. You know, the people in America and Nebraska. It's a crying shame. The people I talk to, many of them, when I talk to them, are concerned about the Second Amendment, Obamacare, and abortion. And some of the voters are swayed by their issues over the program that we bring. But the key is to show them how these wedge issues are connected back to their own economic issues, their own personal economic issues. And we're learning the language to do that. I think we're being very effective. We're presenting this program in real terms that people in the towns, in the cities, on the street can understand. And all the questions that we're getting, we're trying to respond to them either programmatically or through an appeal to the Constitution or both. You know, our campaign supports the full Constitution, and that's where I stand on it. And it's a lot of work, but if we can get these messages out, get this program out, get this program to the attention of the good-hearted people in both political parties, let them reclaim their inheritance that their fathers, mothers, and grandparents earned for them. We can really change things, and we can really turn it around.
That sounds great, Dan, and more power to you.
Thank you.
And again, people who want to do something about this, danfornebraska.com, danfornebraska.com. There's a need, obviously, for financial support. All the details are given there. And once again, people who can go and volunteer are also welcome. Right? What is it, about another week of signature gathering?
We have about a week, and it's going to be close either way. If we make it or we don't, it's going to be just by a hair, and we need all the help we can get. It's all a numbers game here on the ground, Webster. We just need to talk to more people, and then we talk to more people will sign. It'll be good. But, you know, I sympathize with both the Democrats and Republican voters. I mean, they have they just are torn between these wedge issues and these endless war and balancing the budget and threats to Social Security and Medicare, all these hard-won economic rights that we still possess in our country, and they're just lied to and cheated and tricked by both parties, I think. But if you're following my campaign, you can see that we're having an effect. We're having an effect on the rhetoric. We're changing directions of campaigns here, and we're getting more and more attention. And it's a positive thing. Things are happening, and the things we learn on the ground, regardless of the results of our hard work, is going to carry this program and this idea of the New Deal and our program to rebuild America. It's going to carry it forward, regardless of whether we make it or not. But we're going to definitely do our best. And like I said, we've got some more help coming. So, I also wanted to mention that we apparently are getting reports of some free agents operating for us in Nebraska in different parades out west here. People are telling me that they got a flyer from me in places where I didn't attend or didn't know I had people there. So if there are any free agents listening to us and any volunteers who are operating on their own, do reach out to our campaign, because we could certainly use you to get our message out and our petition out. So I really appreciate it if you are working independently in Nebraska, but please make some contact to us, and we will put you to work if you want to work for us. But, yeah.
So these, Dan, I think these would actually be self-starters, right? Self-starters, people who just, they're political sympathizers who they run off a leaflet and go to a parade.
We have a grassroots organization here, and if you are an organization that's operating by yourself, please hook up with us. I mean, it would be it would just really add to our strength. So
you can be much more efficient if you liaise with the rest of the campaign, right? You don't have to be a lone wolf. That's for sure.
But I don't know who's doing that, but thank you very much, and you're welcome to come and join us. We'd welcome to hear from you. But,
and you can be contacted through danfornebraska.com, right? Contact feature on there.
danfornebraska.com, Twitter and Facebook, and also Friends of Dan Burdorf, P.O. Box 6584, Lincoln, Nebraska 68506. Webster, I have to close out here. We do have to get back to work, and we're going to a function here in town we've just been invited to here in Grand Island. There's a charity feed that is going on, and we definitely want to show our support for that and also petition there. So we'll have to say goodbye pretty soon, but I want to thank you so much for having me on your show and giving me so much time and your commitment to helping me and helping get this program out. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we want you on every week all the way to November. And remember, don't forget Meals on Wheels, right? You go to a senior center at lunchtime. That's when a lot of people are going to be interested in signing, right, for a fine young candidate.
Well, I feel a little less young out here in the heat, but it is good, and we are reaching a lot of people.
All right. So this is now the most exciting Senate campaign, right? Forget Kentucky, forget Georgia, forget all this stuff. This is the Senate campaign that counts.
We have to get on the ballot, and we're going to be working for that for the next week, as we've been doing for months. And like I said, it's pretty spread out here in the West, and so our efforts have to be redoubled. That's why some folks are coming in. We welcome more people who can help us. It's going to be a push to the last. And I really do have to go, Webster, but I want to thank you very much again for having me. And we do have to rush off, but thank you very much, Webster.
Okay, we'll see you soon, and we'll see you again next week. Dan Burdorf, candidate for U.S. Senate, Nebraska, danfornebraska.com, danfornebraska.com. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So this is reality. It's the reality of economic privation and hopefully of people organizing to do something about it, programmatically breaking out of the existing party structures. Now, we got to say a bit more about World War I. We've tried to cover Ukraine and related issues. By the way, Yatsenyuk fell when the Svoboda fascist party and the Udar of the Poluka, right, of Klitschko quit. So there's something very smelly going on there. Something rotten in the Ukrainian Rada. But now let's go back to World War I. The essential fact, as I have put forward, if you take a look at tarpley.net, you will see a speech that I gave in 1995 to the Schiller Institute, and you'll see, once again, the essay that I wrote about the same time. Right now you can look at some of this in La France Conquise, available through Progressive Press of California, Progressive Press on the Internet. But for this, you've got to know some French and German, although there's other parts are in English. Let's just try to sum it up. Edward VII is overwhelmingly the architect of World War I, even though he died 4 to 5 years before the war started. And this you can find out from an international selection of commentators. One of them is Émile Fleuron, who had been the foreign minister of France, a very important guy. Fleuron, former member of the Chamber of Deputies, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of France, the Quai d'Orsay, published at Garnier in 1906, La France Conquise, Edward VII and Clemenceau, and essentially his thesis is that what the English victories of Crécy and Agincourt were not able to do, break the spirit of France and reduce France to a puppet state of England back in the 100 Years' War. These are events in the 1400s. What could not be done by Crécy and Agincourt in those defeats has been done by Edward VII. We've also got this other essay here coming from a writer sympathetic to the German side, Reinhold Wagner, W-A-G-N-E-R, the greatest criminal against humanity in the 20th century, King Edward VII of England. This is Berlin, 1914. And the idea in all of these, Edward the Encircler, the personal architect of the alliance system. Remember that what you've got to have to get World War I is, first of all, this alliance system, which means that any war becomes a general war. Any war involving Germany means an attack on France and then an attempt to finish the war against the Russians in the east. And then you need to have a trigger, and that's Sarajevo. So we've got to be able to show that Edward VII's networks, it means Great Britain, but not only, because it's an international network, are involved. Let me also point out that we have other important sources on this. There is an interesting pamphlet which has been pointed out by a few, not by the current crop of Anglo-Americans, but a guy called Delaisi, D-E-L-A-I-S-I, La Guerre qui Vient, that is translated in English, and it is, as the unavoidable war. We've also got the larger book by Charles Henry Norman, The Searchlight on the Causes of World War I. And we've got another interesting one. This is now another country speaking. This is Switzerland, and this is a study called Entente Freimaurerei, that is to say, the Freemasons of the Entente countries and what they did. And that's this is another German study, the Entente Freimaurerei. The Swiss one that I meant to reference is a guy called Adolf Bolliger, B-O-L-L-I-G-E-R. His book is called The World War and the Kingdom of God. This is a Protestant minister, but he's the former rector of Basel University. And the common denominator of all of these is the big emphasis on Edward VII. And I'll go through these as the weeks go by. Let's sample some of this stuff in just a second if we have time. But the idea is this: if you want to have this world war, you've got to have personnel. And Edward VII, the thing about Edward VII is he is the all-time champion of longevity as Prince of Wales, right? Prince Charles of today, the Prince of Wales, complains that Queen Elizabeth has been around, she's been on the throne since 1952, 1953. In the case of Edward VII, he had to wait for his eternal mother, right, who finally died in the beginning of the 1900s. Edward VII was Prince of Wales for 50 to 60 years, more than Charles, at least so far. He was, of course, the most active political operator of the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, otherwise known as House of Windsor. And during this time, he spends most of his time networking. He also has to carry out all the ceremonial duties of the monarch because Queen Victoria is up in Balmoral with her Scottish helper, John Brown, and she's running the death cult around Prince Albert. The people involved, right? And we've gone through some of these, right? Sir Winston Churchill's father, Randolph, was a creature of Edward VII. Sir Neville Chamberlain's father, Joseph Chamberlain, creature of Edward VII. The father of Sir Edward Grey, Sir Edward Grey, British Foreign Minister, 1914. Grey's father, creature, horse administrator of Edward VII. Jackie Fisher of the Royal Navy, creature of Edward VII. But also Théophile Delcassé, French foreign minister, warmonger, and Izvolsky on the Russian side, but also people like Poincaré, Prime Minister of France, President of France, Clemenceau, the Prime Minister and Tiger of France. So these people are there. Another important element, the hysteria, the propaganda. And here, the group, the person that stands out is the individual variously known as Harmsworth and Northcliffe. So this is a demagogic press baron, lord of the yellow press in London, the Daily Mail, the London tabloids, this entire complex of hysteria and chauvinism. And this character, Harmsworth, was made a peer, right, brought into the House of Lords as a reward by Edward. So this is where the entire literature and hysteria about German invasions, Germany coming with the fleet, Germany coming with dirigibles, Germany coming with airplanes, all this other stuff coming forward. And it sets the tone for what we later see with Lord Beaverbrook in the 30s and 40s, Sir Robert Maxwell, Jan Ludwig Hoch in the 70s and 80s, and Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch is nothing but the current occupant of that niche of mass imbecility which Edward had established. And then, of course, the alliances, right? The alliances with France. Out of those 50 to 60 years of Edward as Prince of Wales, we're going to find that he spends a lot of the time in France, and indeed, as king, spends a lot of the time at Biarritz, on the Riviera, in Paris, all this other stuff. And then also with Russia, and that this is due to his personal contacts with, among others, Izvolsky, starting quite a number of years in advance. So, this is the key to it. And unfortunately, most of the historiography cannot grasp this fact. It is all well and good to look at Milner and the round tables and the coefficients and all this stuff. But who are these people? They are stooges, operatives of King Edward VII. So this will be a theme for us for the coming months and indeed years. And therefore we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio. Don't forget the anniversary of the Petersburg Crater coming up on the 30th of July, that weekend. See you next week.